So let's kick off, Rand, and just tell me a little bit about yourself and your career.
Sure, yeah. So I'm best known probably for starting a couple of companies in the internet marketing space. The first one was Moz, which I started many years ago with my mom, Jillian. Ran as CEO for many years, grew to a couple hundred people and a large amount of customers and revenue. And then I left that company almost 4 years ago now and started a new one, SparkToro, which is also in digital marketing, but whereas Moz was an SEO company, SEO software, SparkToro helps with audience research. And that company, we launched our first product, our tool, only about a year ago, and it has been going quite well so far. In between the two companies, I published a book called Lost and Founder, and I do a lot of, well, before the pandemic, I did a lot of speaking and travel, going to conferences, being on stages, that kind of thing. Filmed a popular video series called Whiteboard Friday, and yeah, I think that is most of my professional career, and then hopefully more exciting things to come in the future.
Yeah, totally, Rand. And for me, it's been amazing being able to just kind of watch your career, and particularly, you do reveal all in your book, and which is just a no holds barred sort of kind of adventure into entrepreneurship, some of the highs and lows, which I have to say was extraordinarily useful for me. And honestly, as I reached out to you and told you, probably one of the big reasons why we didn't go for VC funding back in the time, or back a couple of months ago. So a real pivotal sort of seminal sort of book that I got hold of and really enjoyed, quite frankly. But the big difference, I think, between Moz and what you're doing at SparkToro, one of the key differences is that you're using and harnessing the power of the community much more with SparkToro than you ever did with Moz. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you're effectively being able to scale up SparkToro pretty much using a community-based sort of marketing play?
Yeah, so that's absolutely right, Richie. So basically, whereas Moz was built on this engine of essentially, what at the time was sort of called the SEO and content engine, right? So I would, and the team later on, would publish and create a bunch of content. We would try and do that in a way that served the needs of particular keyword terms, right? That people would search for in Google. And then through that publishing and that keyword research, and then, earning links and solving searchers' problems, we would essentially build up an engine of growth and user and customer acquisition. But with SparkToro, the whole thing is kind of out the window, because no one searches Google for the problem that SparkToro solves, which is an interesting conundrum. It means that essentially we have to kind of create the category ourselves, the category of audience research tools. People do audience research, but when they think about it, they don't think, oh, is there software that will solve this problem for me? They assume that they're going to do, hire a market research firm, or run a bunch of customer surveys and interviews, or try and, manually crawl Google and Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and all these places. And frankly, what we've had to do instead is sort of build up a powerful presence on social media channels, a lot of Twitter and LinkedIn for us, a good amount of some Facebook and Instagram as well, a little bit of Reddit. Do a lot of what I'd call influence marketing, influence with no R. We don't do a lot of influencer marketing. Influence like, podcasts and journalists and news publications and industry publications, and a lot of word of mouth through the community of marketers, basically sharing with each other, hey, there's this great free tool. And then through the free tool, whereas Moz was a freemium, right? Moz was a free trial model. SparkToro is freemium. So there's a free version of the product that's useful enough that lots of people spread that around. I think we've got almost 45,000 people who use the free version of the product.
Wow.
and find a lot of value from that. And so that is what builds the flywheel for SparkToro. And I think, the big takeaway for me as a marketer is you can build a flywheel in a lot of different ways, but you have to do it in a way that scales with decreasing friction, or you're not going to get that growth ramp, at least not without spending a ton of money on marketing.
Well, Rand, this is a really interesting point, because a lot of the influence aspect that you describe, one could sort of attribute to be more brand-led marketing in effect, right? So the ability to kind of create the halo effect. Now, clearly in the marketer's dilemma, right, you've got the sort of the short and the long-term aspect of it, and perhaps Moz was more the sort of the short-term sort of paid advertising, highly targeted sort of way to then reach and get conversion. Whilst I think in what you're describing, it feels like to me a sort of much more brand-led sort of halo play, which then gets people more into the community, which then gets people enlisted into your proposition. Does that sort of ring true on some level?
Yeah, I mean, both Moz and SparkToro shared some of that community aspect. Moz did have this certainly a social media presence and a community of people who participated in the blog and commented and created profiles. Moz experimented for a time with sort of a direct messaging system and almost like a forum type of system in the early years. But what SparkToro has done is a little bit more based on exactly what you described. It's essentially the brand plus word of mouth plus sources of influence in the field. So that engine has, for us, been remarkably successful with only 2 people. I think the exciting part is, SparkToro is a team of just 2. It's myself and my co-founder, Casey. Casey runs sort of the technical side of things. I run the content, community, social, customer service, all of that side of things. And we're able to make it work with this tiny, tiny team, despite, not throwing in tons of crazy long hours. I'm not doing the kinds of 50, 60-hour weeks that I was at Moz for many years. We're not venture backed. We have a really, really different type of company that we're building, but we're able to be successful because we invest in this kind of scalable, low touch marketing.
Wow. I mean, that is super impressive, Rand, to be honest with you. And congratulations on just, I mean, it feels like it's got such a humongous feel to the entire brand and what you're doing, and yet to hear behind the scenes, it's running off. I mean, it's amazing, right?
It really is. It's been special. It's been a special experience, Richie, for sure.
And Rand, I think you refer to SparkToro more as a zebra than you do a unicorn. Can you elaborate for us on that?
Yeah. So I think, look, the classic venture capital model, right, which well, is essentially raise a ton of money and try to become a billion-dollar company or a billion-dollar valuation company. Or, and this is true for most venture capital backed firms, die trying, right? And I don't mean die like the human beings, but the company itself goes bankrupt, gets sort of acqui-hired for a low amount of money, is sold for parts, that kind of thing. And the overwhelming majority of venture backed businesses sort of fail in this way. And that's expected, right? With a portfolio model, right? I think that, the classic advice is much like investing in the S&P 500. You want to invest in 500 early stage companies or more, with the expectation that 490 of them are going to not return you anything. They're going to not be very good for their founders, their employees and team, and their customers, right? But the other 10 will turn out to be so radically successful, so massive, that they will return all the money and more. And this model semi kind of works, but it's a it's a tough thing to get going, and it's not a model that we like.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that.
Yeah, so we basically.
Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. At SparkToro, right? We are considering ourselves a zebra company Can you still see me, hear me?
I can indeed. Sorry. Yes.
Oh, okay. It's just the video on the other side. So, at SparkToro, we can choose to raise money in a different way, which is basically from 35 angel investors, individuals, like yourself, in our network, people who are in the marketing field, people who are entrepreneurs themselves or started companies, people who've just, come to know us over the years. For many of our investors, we're their first ever private investment. They've never made another one, which is pretty cool. And we don't try to become a $1 billion valuation. We're not aiming for growth at all costs. I will say, if you look at the last year of SparkToro's performance, it's pretty similar to Moz's early growth rate. So we're technically, we sort of look, venture capable from the outside, but that is not our goal, right? We are not trying to become that company, and we don't need to. SparkToro merely needs to be long-term profitable at any number, $1 million in revenue, 10 million, 15, 2, it doesn't matter. We don't need to be 100, we don't need to be 500. And that is because our investment model pays dividends back to our investors.
Yeah.
Right. So essentially, Richie, imagine, say you're an investor and maybe you own 2% of SparkToro. We would, at the end of a year where we, say, made $1 million in profit, you would get a check for $20,000, and that's after you get paid back your initial investment sum. So, every year that SparkToro is running, you're kind of like, hey, I made some nice money. This is great, right? And it just goes on and on and on. And the goal for us is to try and pioneer this alternative model and build a company that can last for a long time, that doesn't have to be a unicorn.
And Rand, I think you've reached a level of sophistication in your own mind, having mapped the journey through the book, to then get to a point where you're kind of going, actually, I want to see a different way.
Yeah.
I think that's where this sort of the embryonic insights come from. Really, it's sort of maybe from your own experiences of the pain that you go through in the alternative model, to then recreate what this is. And being an entrepreneur myself, I'm 4 businesses into that journey. The one thing that I do reflect on is the stress and the strains that come from, over a long period of time, that come from a bootstrap approach. And I just wondered what you think about that. So, in the Moz model, you were going through a time when, you were able to scale up and get the resource attached to that. But can you really sustain SparkToro? Well, can you sustain, or what was the mental and physical toll that it then had on you to, one, get the investment, but 2, do you think it had been worse had you not got the investment in that organization? Perhaps this is a different business model.
Yeah, so look, with Moz, we did the classic venture fundraising, right? Fly down to Silicon Valley a bunch of times. I detailed this in my book, right? And you rent a car and you go visit all these venture capital offices, and it's an incredibly intimidating experience. And I say this as a white dude, right? Like, I can't even imagine for women what it must be like, for other folks. Like, it's just it is a brutal, really, think of your worst, most intimidating interview, and then do that over and over again, but with the life of your company that you've already built, right, sort of on the line. And I think I detailed in my blog over the years that I had tried to raise money 3 different times, sort of, made 3 different concerted efforts, met with tons of investors, got introductions, sat down at people's offices, all that kind of stuff. And it was a brutal and unsuccessful experience every time, except that last one, right? That last one, I finally was able to close around with Foundry Group out in Boulder. Had a very good experience with them. But hey, they just as easily could have said no. I think, in retrospect, they'd probably look at, Moz's performance, especially after I left as CEO, and said, that was not our best investment. Like, we should probably have deployed that capital elsewhere. But that's, that's true for 490 of the 500 companies that any venture investor puts money into. So not a particular surprise. But yeah, with SparkToro, it really was, Richie, it was a decision based on how Casey and I could perform. So, when I left Moz, I had my salary there. So and it was a nice salary. I'd saved up some money, but I didn't have an exit. We didn't have any capital to speak of. And so we needed to raise money in order to be able to support ourselves and get healthcare for, a year or two while we were building the product and validating our market and, talking to potential customers, building up our audience and our email list, all that kind of stuff. So I'm very, very glad that we raised 1.3 million. We only spent about half of it. We still have a little more than half left now, and we're sort of slowly rebuilding it as we have been profitable, after a few months. But it enabled us to sort of have a cushion. Like we were supposed to launch our product. We were going to launch our product in March of 2020.
Clearly not a good idea, man. Not a good idea.
Yeah. It was just intense. We were already sending out the emails when sort of this pandemic was overtaking everything. We could see all the stats sort of falling off a cliff and all these emails coming back undeliverable because people had lost their jobs. It was a nightmare scenario. And even then we were like, we're going to be okay. We have enough money because we'd raised this sum. We have enough money to ride this thing out. If we're conservative in our approach and we take things slow, we'll be okay. If you're venture backed, I have a friend who actually stayed with us at the end of COVID. And his company, he basically was hitting all the metrics that you had to for a venture backed business, every single one. They were just nailing their marks, but they couldn't raise their next round because COVID sort of, was affecting their business. The investors didn't want to take a chance of when the pandemic was going to end exactly. And so they had to wind it down, pay severance, and just, lay everybody off. And it sucked. Now that it's one of these companies where like they'd probably be doing amazing right now, but they had to wind it down, at the sort of tail end of 2020. There you go.
Rand, I tell you, man, it's such tales of both sides of the coin, right? And I guess in many ways, no right answer. But to be honest, right? You look at Moz, and you do, you mentioned this in the book. When you look at Moz, and probably one of the most successful internet companies over the last decade or so, and what you've been able to deliver, the value you've been able to add, and yet as the founder, suggesting that you would come out of the exit with very little capital to your name on the back of that, that sort of exit that you had. I mean, isn't that almost discount? It almost feels that most people feel entrepreneurship is the dream, and suddenly when you come out founder of Moz, you're gonna kind of come out with a very comfortable life at the end of it. But to be clear, right? So basically, what happened was when I left the company, when I left Moz, there had been no exit, right? So I guess my exit, my departure from Moz was sort of I was disagreeing with management a lot and having a lot of conflicts with the board, and they and I mutually decided, along with a bunch of lawyers over the course of a year, to sign some severance agreements. And that was, it was a really sad, heartbreaking, intense experience because I just had so much of my emotional, personal self wrapped up in the company. But yeah, when I left, I mean, I got a nice severance package, but it was certainly nothing like enough to start a company, right? It was basically, I think I got either 6 months or 9 months of salary, and then like a year of healthcare or something like that, right? So, it was a very nice severance. Like most severance packages are 3 months or less. So this was a very generous severance package, but it was not, nowhere near enough to start a new company. Wow. Hey, well, look, you busted so many myths in the book, and you're busting myths here today, and I, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about you. To be honest, Rand, it's just the level of honesty that you bring is just brilliant. But I want to I want to kind of move on a little bit. I mean, I could talk about entrepreneurship and fundraising and the joys and probably the woes as well. But actually, more so, I think our audience would really appreciate your take on marketing, on modern day marketing. I know you've done it very effectively with SparkToro, but is there any sort of tips, hints, tricks that you can kind of talk to around building community-based marketing, which could be effective for others?
Yeah, I mean, there are many, many topics we could discuss on this front, but one of the things that I think is particularly missed by a lot of marketers is the idea of what makes something resonant and worth sharing, right? So if you're gonna build a community online, if you're gonna earn amplification from influential sources, whether that's individual people, right, the kind of classic influencer with an R, or whether it's sources of influence like podcasts and webinars and newspapers or content publications or conferences or whatever sources of influence you're going after, you need them to have an incentive to share and amplify the work that you're doing. And many marketers, many product creators, many entrepreneurs miss out on this concept because they don't think to themselves and they don't have a great answer to the question, who will amplify this and why? And that question is core to creating a flywheel type of effect in your marketing that works with a community structure, that works with a source of influence based structure, as opposed to one that's kind of, like you mentioned, right? Facebook and Google ad based, right? You can't just pay PR teams more money and expect that everyone's going to write about you and invite you on their show and everyone's going to talk about you. You need to be doing something that creates that sense of emotional resonance, meaning like, I am amazed by this, or I am fearful of this problem and this entrepreneur and company have solved it, or this is newsworthy and worthy of writing about because fill in the blank. And it tends to be the case that emotions are far better at creating that sort of style of amplification than whatever it is, raw facts like, oh, well, the great thing about SparkToro is that it shows you the percent of audience that follows a particular source. Yeah. Okay, that's a fact about the product, but the emotional side of it is we're building a zebra, not a unicorn. We're saying screw you to the venture capital industry. We're telling people in the marketing world, you don't have to rely on Google and Facebook and their powerful duopoly anymore. We're trying to break out of that. That has a little bit more of an emotional resonance, right? You've crafted a villain and you've crafted a hero, sort of your product or your customers using your product. And now there's a conflict, and conflict is interesting and worthy of covering. And oh, this is a new product. That also makes it worthy of and interesting for coverage. And oh, it's free. Free has kind of an emotional, like, oh, let me try something that is free because why not? There's no barrier to entry. So you start to line up these emotional triggers, and you can be very successful with this type of work. SparkToro is reasonably successful with it, but there's plenty of people out there who do even better. I love pointing at Airbnb, who basically had no marketing funnel in kind of SEO and content or advertising or anything like that for many of their first few years. And what they relied on was essentially their community of owners, right? The people who own those properties, to have a vested interest and incentive in sharing them, and this sort of classic enemy, right? The hotel industry. And so they use this conflict, they use their newness, they use their incentivized community to create a phenomenal marketing engine, right? And then it was, hey, you can make money by renting out your place. And oh, you can save money by staying at these places instead of hotels. And oh, you can have these more interesting experiences. And hey, there's, we're fighting against the hotel monopoly on travel. Builds up a lot of emotional resonance.
Rand, I love that thinking, and I guess in the context of the marketer's vocabulary, it comes down to some sort of purpose. I think that's what a lot of people start talking about when it comes to that emotion, and where do you find your purpose as an organization, and that feels very much at the heart of what you're trying to describe, sort of hero villain sort of thing that you're putting forward. The one thing that I would love to get your thoughts on is, can you create an effective flywheel? Because I love your thought. You talk about flywheels all the time, but can you create an effective flywheel on emotional resonance? Because ultimately, you've got to constantly be kind of trying to reinvigorate emotion all the time. And actually, is that an unreliable way of being able to scale?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It really depends on how you think about this flywheel, right? So if the problem is, hey, I need to consistently re-engage one person, I think emotions are not enough. However, if your goal in your flywheel is to capture new people, right, to build up the growth engine of how do I get people aware of Airbnb so that they know to consider it as an alternative to staying at hotels? Or how do I get people to know of SparkToro and think about marketing through sources of influence and discovering them through SparkToro and solving their audience research problems, rather than either falling back on Facebook and Google or doing manual audience research? Then the goal is not re-engage one person who already knows about you with the emotion. The goal is reach new people by having a reason for the people who know you and like you and trust you to amplify you.
Exactly. So, but Rand, so I love that. I love that thinking, and the thought about have a reason for your audience to then amplify you.
Yeah.
How do you incentivize? So I guess maybe incentivize is terribly the wrong word, because actually it's probably them doing it more altruistically. But how do you then effectively do that? So doesn't that kind of go into marketing spend to try and incentivize other people to tell people about you?
Yeah. So I think the incentivize model is one way to do it, right? Airbnb obviously incentivizes the people who own properties and who use Airbnb to rent out those properties. They have an incentive to share and amplify the brand, right? If you own a vacation home on the Oregon coast and you're like, hey, Rand, you should book my place on the Oregon coast. You check it out. Go on Airbnb. That's the place to book me. But in the case of something like SparkToro or even Moz before it, in the case of a lot of B2B and even plenty of B2C, what you're trying to do is create an emotional reason for that amplification, right? And so the way I think about it, for example, with SparkToro is I try and think about why would Ad Age magazine, right? Or why would Marketing Land, why would the New York Times, why would the Wall Street Journal, why would they write about SparkToro? What incentivizes those publications and the people who write for them? And what incentivizes someone who runs a popular podcast in the marketing universe to have me on as a guest to talk about this product? And that is where the emotional trigger comes in, right? That's where that trigger of conflict. Marketing Land has been writing about Facebook and Google for forever. Now here's someone who's coming and saying, you don't need to use those as your primary marketing channels. In fact, I think those companies are kind of evil. And I think the duopoly ownership of the marketing and advertising space is quite evil. And it creates all these problems around income inequality, and it reinforces, sort of big brands and prevents challengers and all these problems. That's pretty interesting. That's worthy of coverage, right? That conflict in and of itself is interesting. Let me see if I can get Rand on as a guest. Or let me take some of the research that he's written about Google's zero-click search problem, or Facebook's, drop in sending out traffic and becoming a walled garden. Yeah, you know what? Let's write about that. And we'll cite his research. And it has an emotional core, even though it's a facts and figures story.
Rand, what that says to me is the thing that you become famous for, the thing that your company becomes famous for, isn't actually the core proposition of what you're selling, which is kind of interesting, right? Because we have
it's the problem.
right?
Yeah.
But you're talking about the hero villain, the antithesis to the big other conglomerates. You've not at all talked about the in-depth audience insight that you can gain on the back of using your proposition, right? And by the way, I buy into this wholeheartedly. And my hypothesis, interesting. So the School of Marketing, for example, we're a complete mission-led organization, and we have our purpose in life is to help young people fall in love with our industry. And we do that through a variety of ways. We have a mentoring scheme and program. We run in-school programs to get younger people educated in the area of marketing. Now, of course, we have to be self-sustaining. And so we also run a number of training capability programs. We run apprenticeship programs here in the UK, but we don't need to talk about any of that. Actually, what we talk about is the stuff about how we are trying to help the industry move forward for the younger generation. And that in itself is what makes us famous. And that's what enlists young people. That's what enlists companies to get excited about us, to work with us. And then the core proposition falls off the back of that. And that's kind of, I love it.
This is perfect, right? This fits exactly with what I'm saying, right? You create that emotional resonance of, look, one of the classic problems in the marketing world is there is a huge amount of demand for talent and the supply is too low, right? Every marketer that I talk to has trouble hiring for their teams, their agency, their company. And also at the same time, you have this massive problem of tons and tons of people, around the world who are essentially underemployed or unemployed, right? And they need opportunities. And so the way to fix that, there's only one way to fix that. You have to educate people who need work in the ways that employers need them to be talented.
Exactly.
Now you've created something emotional. What are you doing? You are lifting people up. You are giving them opportunity. You're giving them a chance to have a better life than their parents did. You are contributing to, an industry which, one of the nice things about marketing, depending on where you work in it, it can be very altruistic, could be deeply capitalist too, but you're solving this problem that is painful for so many people. On both sides of the equation, right now you've created, right? You've got a villain. Your villain is unemployment, underemployment, lack of education, lack of talent, and you're the hero.
Guys, I just want to a call out here. This is so fundamentally important to all your marketing activities. It is just so worth thinking about the hero villain analogy and how you can connect on an emotional level. I mean, this is really the core of creating something magical for your organizations. So please do think about this as you're watching the talk and then thereafter. It really is. I mean, it's worked wonders for us. The fear that I have with the School of Marketing, and I'm not turning this into a consulting session, clearly, but the fear that I have is that we can't create a good enough flywheel. So I think our brand presence and awareness has flown over the existence because of the emotion we've created, and we've galvanized people in the industry. What I'm fearful of is that enough to then do the conversion bit on the other side, where we are educating young people, we're educating apprentices, we're educating people in the corporate world. But I guess the point being then, I guess the barrier is we can enlist people, we can get engagement, we can get awareness. We need to convert. And does that do that?
Yeah, so I think that the different parts of your marketing funnel can have different triggers, and the job of a great marketer is to find what are those triggers that are persuasive and compelling at each of these levels. So it could be that the emotional layer and that framing of conflict and resolution, that works really well at the top of the funnel to get people who are brand aware, and that brings them to your website. And then it's going to be the nuts and bolts of, well, what does my career progression look like? And how much opportunity is there really? And how much is this going to cost me? And how do I afford that and fund it? And who's going to pay for it? And, are there programs that I can do to apply to? How much time does it take? Where do I have to go for this? Is this going to work with my geography and time zone and, schedule? Right. And so you have to start answering a lot more of that nuts and bolts question and finding, I mean, my favorite process for conversion rate optimization is always go find the customers, the potential customers who look like and have all the attributes of people who have successfully become customers but didn't sign up, and find out what prevented them from doing so, and then answer their questions in the same way the people who did sign up said that they overcame those objections, right? So you're interviewing both groups, surveying both groups, interviewing both groups, finding the answers that these customers gave to the problems that held back the potential customers, and then building your funnel, your marketing funnel to answer those. That can be emotional, but it can also be very, very technical or nuts and bolts or really boring stuff. And by including it in your materials, in your whatever landing pages or videos or onboarding or walkthroughs or product itself, you can have a big success there.
So Rand, I just want to ask you, because you've dropped an absolute golden nugget when it comes to sort of top end of the funnel, how to actually create audiences, how to build communities, and how to get people enlisted to want to talk about you. I want to just, you're a deep thinker and thought leader, as well as at the bottom end of the funnel too. And that's as much about, as you say, the nuts and bolts about how you actually get people converted through once you've got them and sort of the brand aware. So what are the latest sort of thoughts that you have when it comes to that bottom end of the funnel and how to be effective in converting your leads through the last mile?
Yeah, well, so there's a whole bunch of challenges that exist in sort of conversion rate optimization and that bottom of the funnel, getting people through the funnel. I think one of the biggest is making sure that you have attracted the right people, right? People who are going to be right potential customers for you at the top of the funnel. And one of the challenges that I see quite often is, for example, I'm not saying that this is true for school marketing, right, Richie? But potentially, you get people who are already professional marketers, and they come to school of marketing and they look at the product and they're like, "Oh, that's really interesting. Maybe if I find someone in my network who's considering a career in marketing, I'll send them here." But then they leave, and your stats look like high abandonment rate, right? What's actually happened is you've attracted people who are not right customers. They've looked at your offering and then they've left. Same thing happens at SparkToro, right? A lot of people will try the product for the first time. They'll check it out. They'll be like, "Hey, this is cool and interesting, but I don't do this professionally. I don't need to discover my audience's sources of influence. I don't need to do professional audience research. I don't need to see the demographic data about a particular audience that, follows my brand versus my competitors, or, that engages around a particular topic online. Like that's not part of my job. It's interesting to know it exists, but I'm going to take off. Maybe I was more interested in how Rand is building a zebra instead of a unicorn, or I was more interested in the sort of anti-Facebook Google duopoly." And this is okay, right? It's okay to bring people in there to that top of funnel, and then to lose a little bit of folks at the middle and bottom of funnel. I think what's key is recognizing where are your right customers, where are your best customers learning about you? Can you go find more sources like that? Can you go tell those stories of the stories that resonate with your core customer in the right places and in the right way with the right messages, so that they come to your site through your funnel and down to a conversion path? That I think that's a little bit more of like middle to bottom of funnel. And then there's the very bottom of funnel to conversion, which for us, very frankly, is extremely centered around email. And I think a lot of folks, unfortunately, a lot of marketers miss out on that. Hey, I'm going to use my top and middle of funnel to capture a lot of email addresses. And then that email is going to be how I retain people, keep them sort of as interested and engaged community members until they're either ready to convert themselves or refer someone who's going to convert, and I'm going to provide them value through the email address that they've given me and through the content that I send them and the, sort of whatever it is, free products or free tool access or whatever you're offering, right? It could be that someone's planning that Airbnb vacation for 2 years from now. They're thinking, well, the end of it's COVID now, but sometime the end of 2022, I'm going to go to Hawaii. Wonderful. So Airbnb's funnel isn't failing, it's working. It's working just the right way, right? It's captured that interest up front, and now it's sort of lead nurturing them all the way down. That's on the consumer side, right? For School of Marketing, it could be, hey, we attracted this, an owner of an agency, and they're in our email funnel. And then, they finally get an email that triggers them to go, oh, hey, I'm leading a college school group next, I'm being introduced. I should mention School of Marketing. Like that's the people.
Rand, it's so relevant because I think the problem is most marketers get so caught up on the short-term metrics of trying to prove their flywheel that works, and actually they miss the bigger picture in this. Yes. I love this. And by the way, I speak to my team all the time, and I sort of say, guys, it's taken me 2 years sometimes to get a client. And that's 24 coffees, right? That's getting in 24, and it literally is. It is about meeting them every month for 2 years in order to get the time when they're ready. And actually, great marketing recognizes that it does take time to nurture them through, and people will convert the different moments. Rand, I'm running out of time, but I want to ask you maybe just a couple of more questions, if I may.
Sure.
I was at MadFest. You probably haven't heard of MadFest, but it's a big sort of festival in the UK. And we had some great speakers, Sir Martin Sorrell, Rory Sutherland, just being two of them. But the reason why I mention them is because they have a similar point of view on this. I'd love to get yours. So the marketing world is turning extremely short-termism. And we talked about sort of the digital tools or paid advertising into conversion rate down the funnel and converting as quick as possible. But they actually, interestingly, given the ilk that they come at, they said that great marketing is not about the conversion. It's actually about spreading the broadest awareness, because you genuinely never have the resources and you never really understand and know who could really desire your product. And therefore, the most important job is not to worry about the conversion at the bottom end. Actually, great marketing, all you need to do is spread the awareness as best you can to reach the most people as possible, because you genuinely will never know the entire ecosystem of who that target audience really is. What do you think?
I think they are absolutely right for their audience and customers, right? So those two folks, right? Rory, I've met a couple of times, and I think the other guy, Sorrell, he runs an ad firm, right? And exactly. So they are serving large B2C, primarily B2C advertisers. If you're working with a chemical engineer consultancy who's trying to get, engineering firms and, water distillation plants in the UK to use your services, broad brand awareness, getting, someone in Canada who plays a lot of pool at a bar to know about your engineering firm's expertise, not useful. That is not your goal. I disagree with those guys, right? But if you are Mars bars or for their audience, their advice is right. For your audience, it might not be right? So I think, look, for SparkToro, I don't need everyone to have heard of us, right? Yeah. I just need professional digital marketers and market researchers to have heard of us and to know what we do and to check us out. I don't need people outside of that world to be even aware of SparkToro. It's fine if they are, it doesn't hurt anything, but it would be a waste of my time and resources, especially as a 2-person company, right? I just don't have the bandwidth for that. and that would be a poor use of my energy and Casey's energy sort of building our funnel and our flywheel. So
yes. Yeah. And I totally agree with you on that front. Rand, I just want to come back to the 2-person company thing, because actually, from a marketing perspective, you only have one person in the company, which is you. And And there'll be lots of sort of small business owners in that position. In fact, we've got lots of people studying with us who they are literally the only marketing person in a 5-person company, as an example. And so how on earth, with that limited amount of resource and time, what are the key things that they should be thinking about and doing to create this flavor of marketing, given the low level of resource they will have? They probably have their both hands and no marketing budget. So what are the things that you're doing to do that, which they could be helpful to them?
So I would not do what I'm doing. I would do something at the intersection of three things, right? I give this advice a lot, which is essentially, you want to find areas of marketing where you have personal passion and interest. That could be, I'm really great at buying ads. Maybe you love buying ads and optimizing your Google and Facebook ads and finding, oh, well, I can do some cool Twitter ads and LinkedIn ads and Reddit ads. And I'm really good at optimizing all those. And I love finding like the messaging that works. Great, cool, awesome. If you have personal passion and interest, and you believe that you can do something uniquely different and better than your competition, right? So if you say, gosh, there's a lot of people who are running ads on Reddit, but they don't get the Reddit sub-community understanding the way I do, because I participate in those communities and I see what works and I have relationships with them. I'm going to be able to do a better job of messaging and content creation and getting that ad to work. That's going to work for me better than it works for any of my competitors. Great. So you have personal passion and interest, and you have a competitive advantage, right? You have a reason why you're going to provide unique value that's different from your competition. And then the third thing that you've got to have is doing those marketing things in places where your audience pays attention. If you tell me, oh yeah, I'm trying to market for this chemical engineering consultancy, and I'm doing a lot of Instagram ads. No, that's not you're in the wrong place, my friend, right? Your audience is not there. But if you can combine up those three, my audience actually pays attention in these places, right? I have personal passion and interest, and I can provide unique value that no one else can. Find the overlap of those three things, and you will have great marketing channels and tactics and strategies for yourself. If you lose any one of those, you're probably not going to be great at it. I've never met a marketer who's like, well, a lot of my audience is on LinkedIn, and I think maybe, I can provide unique value in LinkedIn this way, but I really hate it. Like, it's just, it's personally anathema to me, and it's just annoying. Any time I spend on it really drains my energy. I'm sorry, friend, you're not going to be great at it, right? It's not for you. Find another channel. Oh, you love doing webinars, love doing video content. Awesome. YouTube is a huge opportunity for you. Putting your YouTube video, taking the videos that you create and maybe pushing those to YouTube or to LinkedIn, and then ignoring the rest of LinkedIn marketing. That could work great. Go for that, right? Find the intersection that works for you.
Rand, the one thing I would say about that piece of advice is that, and I've heard many people talk about marketing strategy and how to be effective. The layer that you have added is that you actually have to have an insane amount of personal passion to keep it going, to keep that, to create that consistency day in, day after day. And actually, I think for me, when I think about marketing strategy, it comes down to persistency and consistency. If you can have those in equal measure to keep on going over time, then you can build that awareness as you go through. But without
marketing, Richie, it works the same way that investing does. There's a compound interest over time, right? You build up awareness around a small number of people, and they spread it a little bit, and then you keep doing your marketing and reach another small group of people. And over 6 months, gosh, the progress feels really slow. And over 6 years or 16 years, you've doubled or tripled or quadrupled your money, your marketing funnel, right? Your marketing ability. And suddenly, like, the brand flywheel starts to turn. I saw this at Moz, absolutely, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, building up that flywheel, generating that interest rate on your marketing, right? Essentially, that each new person you reach builds a couple more people beyond that. And once you start getting from dozens to hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands, millions of people knew about Moz, right? Today, today maybe it's tens of thousands of people know about SparkToro, but in 5 years, if we keep it up, even at the slow, sort of steady, consistent rate, it's not venture capital growth rates, but it's, at sort of indie startup, zebra startup rates, maybe 1 million people know about SparkToro.
Hey, for sure. Rand, I've got absolutely no doubt that that's going to be the case. And I hope in some small way I've contributed, given you're in the book now as well. Came out 2 weeks ago, and well, that's Rand's books on there, Lost and Found. I highly recommend it. But yeah, my book came out 2 weeks ago, and it's doing pretty good at the moment on Amazon. So it's a special moment in time.
Yeah, Richie, congratulations for that. I know what it's like to publish a book for sure, and it is super exciting. And I truly appreciate you having me on, spreading the word about SparkToro. Yeah, means a ton.
Rand, I've just got to say that it's been such a pleasure, and genuinely, even more so than I imagined it. I mean, having read through your thoughts time and time again, it's a real great to connect with you in this way and to hear some of your thoughts. And you've really genuinely added a lot of value to the conversation and to the marketing community that we have. So just really want to say thank you for your time. It's really, really kind.
My pleasure, Richie. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Take care. Bye.